there is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from feeling like a stranger inside your own life. You may look normal to everyone around you. You may sound right, react correctly, even know how to perform the version of yourself that makes other people comfortable. But beneath that surface, something feels quietly distorted. It is not exactly dishonesty, because you are not inventing a fake life from nothing. It is closer to a slow adjustment of your voice, your emotions, your instincts, and your desires until they fit the expectations around you. After a while, the deepest confusion is no longer whether people accept you. It is whether there is still a real self left underneath the performance. The most painful part is not always rejection. Sometimes, it is the realization that what is being welcomed is only a role, and in many lives, the force that first builds that role is not discipline or maturity, but shame. Shame does not merely wound a person for a moment. It reaches much deeper than pain. Ordinary guilt says that something you did was wrong. Shame gradually teaches you that something about you is wrong. That difference changes everything. Once a person begins to experience shame in this deeper form, they do not simply correct a behavior and move on. They start to distrust their own temperament, their emotional reflexes, their natural desires, even the way they occupy space in the world. What emerges from this is not just suffering, but self-concealment. The parts of the self that once drew ridicule, disappointment, or contempt are pushed back, covered over, and denied expression. In this way, shame becomes more than an emotion. It becomes a method of inner reorganization. A human being who could have grown from within now begins to shape himself from the outside in. He no longer asks what feels true. He asks what will keep him safe from humiliation, exclusion, or disapproval. Seen through Nietzsche's lens, this condition reveals something deeper than wounded self-esteem. Freedom is not simply the permission to do whatever one wants, nor is it a dramatic rebellion against every rule. It is something far more inward. It is the ability to stand in relation to oneself without shame. Nietzsche can be read as pointing toward a form of becoming in which a person no longer lives as an apology for his own nature. A healthy life does not begin by forcing the self into an alien mold. It begins by allowing one's deepest structure to unfold according to its own necessity. An acorn does not fail because it does not become a pine tree. In the same way, a person becomes distorted not first because he lacks ability, but because he has learned to treat his own temperament as a defect. What shame attacks, then, is not only confidence. It attacks the very ground from which a person might have become fully himself. At first, shame speaks with an external voice. It comes from parents, classmates, teachers, friends, or any environment that teaches a person which ways of being are acceptable and which are not. The original wound may be a laugh, a correction, a look of disappointment, or a repeated demand to stop being so sensitive, so strange, so emotional, so visibly oneself. But what makes shame powerful is that it does not remain outside. Over time, the judgment is absorbed and converted into an inner authority. The person begins to anticipate rejection before it happens. He edits himself before anyone else has the chance to condemn him. What was once social pressure becomes self-surveillance. At that point, the mask is no longer a temporary defense used for survival in certain moments. It hardens into a social identity, and when this process continues long enough, the deepest tragedy appears. A person is no longer performing only in front of others. He goes on performing even in solitude, as if the audience had moved inside his mind. To see how this happens in an ordinary life, imagine a boy whose natural disposition is gentle, inward, and emotionally open. He is drawn to quiet interests, speaks with sincerity, and feels things deeply. None of this is a problem in itself, but the world around him does not meet those traits with patience. It meets them with small humiliations. A parent becomes visibly embarrassed by his softness. Classmates make jokes when he shows too much feeling. An older relative tells him he will never survive unless he toughens up. No single moment needs to be catastrophic. What shapes him is repetition. He slowly learns that certain parts of him bring exposure, and exposure brings pain. So he begins to edit himself. His voice becomes harder. His manner becomes flatter. He stops admitting what he loves. Later, He may even mock in others the same sensitivity he once carried naturally, because contempt now feels safer than recognition. Outwardly, this looks like maturity or adaptation. Inwardly, something more tragic has occurred. He has not simply developed new strengths. He has started to organize his personality around the avoidance of humiliation. Over time, he may become socially acceptable, even admired, but what receives approval is no longer the person he might have become. It is a performance built in response to shame. The price of this transformation is not always visible from the outside. A false self can function extremely well in the world. It can be praised, rewarded, even mistaken for strength. A person can appear confident, socially fluent, and fully adjusted while remaining divided within. That is what makes this condition so difficult to recognize. The suffering it produces is not always dramatic. Often, it takes the form of a quieter and more intimate kind of loneliness. No one truly encounters you, because what they meet is a version of you designed for approval. From that inner split, other consequences begin to follow. Genuine intimacy becomes difficult, because exposure feels dangerous. Resentment grows, often without a clear object. Sensitivity in others becomes irritating, because it reflects a buried part of the self that was once forced into hiding. In the end, the deepest wound is not rejection. It is being welcomed, valued, and even loved for a role that was built by abandoning what was most alive in you. At this point, an important distinction has to be made. Not every form of shame is equally destructive, and not every social norm is an instrument of oppression. Human beings do need correction. They need discipline, limits, and forms of guidance that help transform impulse into character. The problem begins when correction no longer addresses what a person does, but quietly condemns what a person is. There is a profound difference between being taught responsibility and being taught to feel estranged from one's own nature. In the first case, one grows. In the second, one fragments. The same is true of social expectations. Some norms make life together possible, but when a norm demands that a person amputate what is most inwardly alive in order to be considered worthy of love, it no longer forms character. It domesticates the self. That is the line between maturation and betrayal. Many people believe their problem is simply a lack of confidence, but confidence is often only the surface. Beneath it lies something more damaging and more hidden. A person may have spent years learning to look at himself through the eyes of those who once made him shrink. In that condition, healing is not merely a matter of becoming bolder or more self-assured. It requires something more difficult. It requires withdrawing one's loyalty from the judgments that taught the self to feel ashamed of its own shape. A life worth living is not necessarily a life approved by everyone around you. It is a life no longer organized around self-rejection. What shame destroys is not only peace of mind, but the possibility of becoming whole. And perhaps the deepest loneliness is not the absence of other people. It is the distance that opens when a person can no longer live in honest relation to his own nature.